the question is refuge, and so I want to feel out. We want to just walk into it gradually together, Tess and I. And meanwhile, feeling the time, hearing the sounds, seeing what's in front of you. If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's cold. If you're in the northern hemisphere, it might be warm. It's whatever bizarre thing the weather is doing today. So, and since we're taking up refuge, and refuge begins, I don't know, begins with words usually of, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the teachings, I take refuge in the Sangha, in the community. I take refuge in awakening. I take refuge in the way. I take refuge in my companions. It's not one of those things to, it's kind of like, it is a koan really, but so each of those words is treated as a koan in the koan curriculum. And so we just let them sort of enter us and say, I wonder what that means to me, taking refuge in awakening, taking refuge in the path. I don't know, I never thought about refuge myself. I think I was taking it before I thought about it. You know, and there are two aspects. One is really just finding a path and a way to do it, which probably means companions. And awakening is experiences that convince you to do it and keep doing it. You know? And there's that. So, and then I think I didn't really get like why you would take refuge, why you would wear a rakusu, which is the robe of the Buddha. So part of refuge is, in a certain sense, taking on the accoutrements of community, the connections of community. And I don't know, I never thought of myself as very good at that. So I didn't wonder about that much, but other people took refuge and I didn't. It was pretty much like that. And I remember, and then I started to think about, I wonder why I didn't. And the first opportunity I had, I think, was with Tibetans at the end of a long retreat. And they had a fairly simple system where you take refuge kind of in a big group and promise all these things that I thought, well, you would never do. Or at least I would never do. I'm not going to give up sex, and I'm not going to give up drugs, and I'm not whatever, or wine, or whatever it is I didn't want to give up, and so it's sort of, and so I had no feeling for I had the feeling for it as a sort of before and after a Cartesian process, really, and I had no feeling for it as a path, and you would find out things would reveal themselves as you stepped into it. And I think that's the primary thing about refuge is I found that, you know, when my life was difficult, I would meditate. So that was taking refuge. And even if my life wasn't difficult, it was good to meditate. And that was another level of taking refuge, not just using it as a repair operation. So yeah, so that. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately because, you know, I think, well, what are we doing at PZI, and what am I handing on? And things like that. What are we handing on when we hand on the Dharma? And I think, or what am I doing with my life, really? I could do other things. So, and I think it's somehow holding a path for people to enter, so that if they put out a foot, they're just on the path, and holding and then handing it on to others who can in turn hold it, who are teachers. And there's something kind of, and it's a I don't know what to do about most of the things in the world. People come up to me. I had lunch with a guy yesterday I've known for years who said, well, what are we going to do about it? And he listed like 40 things. And I said, I think I'm going to just run a Zendo and do meditation and teach meditation. I can do that, you know, and I'm going to be modest about it. And so I think that's part of the truth of, not that we don't care about the great issues, or not that they don't trouble us or overwhelm us, you know, but we can be modest about, you know, well, our solution is always about something we take refuge in the numinous, we take refuge in something greater than us, and we will die. And in turn, we hand that holding and that possibility and that understanding of the great archetypal forces and the great images that come up out of the soul. And we hand that on to someone else. And it's a tradition. So I kind of like that. I like, so somebody said to me recently, what a strange thing you've done with your life. And when I looked at it, I thought, yeah, they're probably right. and really, I liked, one of the things about Refuge is we're not looking for some sort of back door with things. We're in. And really, that's a matter of being in life, so that when I'm in it, I'm feeling it, I have it, and I'm not apologizing for being in it either. And we're not living the wrong life. We can't really live the wrong life because it's ours. I can do stupid stuff, but I do stupid stuff anyway. So that's kind of a given. And so refuge is not, in fact, even a promise not to do stupid stuff. It's putting everything we do in the context of the path. And I think for me, that's a huge thing. And then there are various things when you look at refuge is, you find your resistances. You find, what is my, why don't I want to take refuge? Why didn't I want to take refuge with the Tibetans? And I didn't, because I didn't feel honest, but also I was incredibly unimaginative. I could tell that one had to live life. One couldn't cut off from life. And so I had to deal with, whatever it was in the context of refuge. And later on, I realized that the Tibetans just wanted some sort of vessel or containment for you if they were giving you a powerful practice, and they were giving us deity yoga, which they gave us anyway. But then they said, we won't give it to you. After giving it to us, they said, we won't give it to you unless you do refuge, which is kind of sweet. And later on, I realized, that's meant to help us, to contain us a bit. So we know what we're looking for. We know what we want, which is some sort of resting in the vastness and ability to operate out of that. But then the other thing, and then later on when I came in, I ended up in Zen because I kind of knew that was right for me, and or Chan, and or at least I thought that was right for me, and it was one of those weird things where my phobia about refuge met a phobia in the whole community I was in, because the community was all ready to do refuge and getting rakusus and things ready, and then this was Robert Aiken's community in Hawaii, and then Koen Yamada, his teacher, suddenly decided not to allow him to do refuge. Well, you could have said that last week, and so it was very much a Japan Inc. kind of thing. But it was also him saying it's something to be taken on gravely. You don't just hand out refuge, And so, actually, I remember not objecting to that at all, And I think most people didn't. They felt, well, we'll just take more, whatever the reasons, we'll take more time. And then when I did do it, it was much later, and I was already a teacher before I took refuge and had a rakusu and things. And then it brings up all sorts of. Some people sewed their rakusus then, and I was terribly klutzy and things like that. And so there was this woman who was a great seamstress, and I liked and respected, and was a good Zen student. She offered to sew it for me for half of the price of a car that I had that she wanted, and so I did that. So that was my first rakusu, and which I then handed on to another friend. But yeah, so and I think I really didn't want to take refuge, because I thought, I don't want to be one of those people walking around with one of those things on my neck, And I realized that there are all these ways of, and if the path, we're in a vessel in the path, that's what a path is a journey, is a container for a journey, and we're in a vessel. And then there are all these ways of attacking the vessel. And, you probably noticed this yourself and in yourself. And one of mine was, I'm superior to this, or I'm not going to indulge in this. I'm not going to descend into this. And then other people had, I'm not good enough for this. My first one was, I'm not good enough for this. I could never keep these vows. And without even examining what they meant, So another thing, there are other obvious, I suppose we'd call them resistances to being in the path, like envy, other people have done it and I don't think they're doing a very good job. That sort of thing, criticism, and flattery, well, it's so wonderful and you're such a wonderful teacher, I couldn't possibly, etc. And flattery is a big, you notice that if you're flattering someone, you're avoiding something. So all those standard sort of ways in which we postpone being here and postpone really being in the Tao. And so that's all refuge is. It says, let's be in the Tao. And so it's a kind of cool thing. And I think I want to, there are other things. I saw this come online. It's all illusion. That's another resistance to refuge. No, it's not. It's not all illusion. Things are not as they seem, nor are they otherwise, as the koan goes. And let me now hand over to Tess and see what she wants to say.
So funny. I had it coming exactly the opposite set of issues, which was the minute I heard it, I thought, oh, that's what, I want that. I was looking for that, which I'm not sure was any less misguided in certain ways, but maybe I'll talk about that in a second. But it was just a different way of thinking, instead of pushing it away, trying to grab hold of something. But I think there is, maybe if you signed up for today, you feel this too, but there's something about just the word refuge that immediately, at least in my heart, kind of just grabs you. You think, well, what's that? Like, where do I find that? Or where do I have that? And maybe there are already places that you think you have it. And maybe exclude other places because you think, I have it when I go into the mountains or when I'm with people I trust or when I, that kind of thing. And then everywhere else becomes suddenly not refuge. And you think, well, if I could just, I don't know, have that, then I could go around to all these other places and maybe not feel threatened or afraid or that kind of thing. But one of the things I noticed starting to prepare for this is how as soon as refuge enters the field, it's like everything in my life starts to stick to it, starts to become available in relationship to it. And the shape that took this week is we have right outside my little screen porch door, we have this little family of eastern phoebes, which are a little flycatcher. And we've noticed this week that they were getting ready to fledge. There were 3 little tiny people getting ready to, and tweeting and spreading their wings. And as we were sitting there, the first one jumped out of its nest. And, there's this moment, and I started thinking, oh, that's so much a refuge thing that I think that refuge is actually having a nest. It's a place that feels safe and buffered and that I can return to. But in fact, it's that moment of, John was saying this very well, of actually entering life fully, entering completely the uncertainty, and that refuge somehow becomes in the wings and the beak and the air and the flies and the everything that suddenly comes into view because you've left the nest. And in a way, the nest is kind of an image of the self. It's something we build that we think will keep us protected, or in a way, keep us in the known universe of who we think we are, or what we think the world is. But instead, it's not that that's bad. When you're a little baby bird and you don't have any feathers yet, it's nice to have a place that takes care of you and protects you and gives you food. But it quickly grows very small. And anytime we start relating to the world as inside the nest and outside the nest, everything is always getting smaller and more limited than it is. And particularly in the way that we hold the vows as koans, it's like we see refuge, or Zen sees refuge, as a way of always widening what's possible and destroying the small ideas that we want to use to say, how will we fix the world? How will we get people to behave? How will we ensure that, I don't know, that things stay the way we think they are? And I think the really interesting thing about treating the vows as koans the way we do is that immediately what you find is that life is absolutely chock full of contradictory truths at every given second. And that mostly what we want to do is find a way that's simple and clear, but in fact, what has to happen on the path, you just see, well, wait a second, it's all true and it's all changing all the time. And by really being here and somehow wrapping my arms around or making space for all the things that contradict inside me or between me and someone else or in the world, that some kind of responsiveness can emerge that actually accords with the situation. The old Chan masters used to say, they would hope for a response that would introduce more freedom into the situation instead of making it smaller, making it bigger. And so it's funny with these little Phoebes, because yesterday, when I was really in love with them and they were being incredibly cute, I was looking up all this information about them and how good they are. It's good to have Phoebes. They eat bugs and they're very nice birds, and they're friendly, and they're all these things. And that was good. We like Phoebes. And then cowbirds became bad because they somehow lay eggs in the nests of the Phoebes and sometimes hurt them. Okay, Phoebe's good, cowbird's bad. But then this morning, we found out that what happens when all the little baby birds leave the nest is all the little bird mites that were inhabiting them make a rush for any living being they can possibly find. And so bathrobes and screen porch and cats and humans suddenly had little bird mites crawling all over them. And then it was nest bad, nest not good, nest. And you see, all of this is true, and none of it needs to mean anything. That now we know certain things. Our perspective has been wider. Now we know what happens when all these different things interact, and we might be able to make more creative, more helpful responses to things. And I guess a couple more things, and maybe we'll do some sitting, but that response that accords with things is a really interesting thing. There's a great koan that always feels a little bit in the territory of refuge when someone says to great Yun Men on his deathbed, what's the teaching that lasts an entire lifetime, or what's the teaching of a whole lifetime? And Yun Men just says, say something in response, or what's sometimes been translated as an appropriate response. And it's like, we think we're going into refuge to have an appropriate response in terms of an idea sometimes of what it would be good to be a kind person, or a bodhisattva, or be, I don't know, patient and understanding and equanimous and something like that. But in fact, when a response accords with the situation, it breaks things open, it makes them free. And an example I was thinking about with this, maybe I'll tell you some more later, but I was reading this thing. This psychoanalyst was seeing a young boy and his mother who had recently lost his father. So he was grieving, and he was kind of, I don't know, curmudgeonly for a young guy, and defended and angry. And when the session was about over, he turned to the guy and said, "All psychiatrists are assholes." And the psychiatrist was kind of shocked about this, but he had been a long-time Zen practitioner. And what immediately came into his mind was, he said to the kid, there are two problems with your statement. The first is that I'm a psychoanalyst, not a psychiatrist. And the second is that, if you're so smart, why did it take you so long to figure out my limitations? And the kid didn't have any idea what to say, because this wasn't what he was expecting. And he said to the psychoanalyst, "I'm going to poison my mother." He's just doing everything to try to get a response. And again, this guy, not knowing anything about what should he say, just turned to the kid and said, "Thank you." And the kid got incredibly flustered and said, "You're a shrink. You're not allowed to say thank you." But already the kid was starting to smile, like the situation broke open, and it wasn't according to anything that should happen. It wasn't according to any idea of, what do you say to a kid when they say, "I'm going to poison my mother"? It somehow accords with the situation, that there was a deeper sense of compassion and playfulness that actually set things free. I guess the last thing to say about that is, when I first, many years ago, it's probably been I don't know, a while ago now, I happened on an article. It had a very unsexy title. It was called, like, "The Decision to Become a Buddhist." And it was by Trungpa Rinpoche, another Tibetan. And but it was all about refuge. And I immediately, without even finishing reading it, printed it out. Like, it grabbed something in me. And I knew, I had been exposed to Zen for a little while at that point, but I hadn't really been exposed to the notion of refuge. But one of the things he said in the article that really struck me, particularly where I was at the time, was he said, refuge is the end of the spiritual supermarket. Meaning that you're going to stop, in our lineage, what we'd call picking and choosing according to, what kind of self you think you should be in that moment. What would it be to be a good person, or what would it be to, I don't know, continue your story as a bad person? But that you were going to really, as John was saying, drop all that and enter a path, and that these were some touchstones that you could rely on a little bit when you couldn't really rely on anything else. And I think in my own life at the time, I was at an interesting point where it was like the architecture of myself, who I took myself to be at that time and how I was being in my life, was really starting to crumble. But I didn't really know what else to do. And I was very, very aware of looking for something. But in a lot of ways, I was still looking for something that was according to my ideas of what would be good to have. And there was a way that, he was talking about, kind of as John was saying, that having no exits, that's part of the end of the spiritual supermarket shopping. It's like, I'm not going to do this just as long as it's comfortable, or it gets me what I want, or accords with my ideas, or that I'm somehow going to take refuge in the knowing that people have been doing this for 2,500 years. And despite my opinions about all that, it somehow seems to be workable. they somehow seem to keep discovering something. And one of the things that I think stepping onto that, when you step into that vessel of refuge and looking at the vows and your ideas, part of it is you have to deal with all your own, I don't know, fears, compulsions, ideas, beliefs, like everything must go. It's like a, I don't know, end of season sale. Everything must go. But you also have to kind of ferret out all the collective ideas that you've been absorbing and that seem to then come up in the guise of, you wouldn't want to be that kind of person. And it's a place that really requires that you enter each situation for yourself completely empty-handed to see what's actually there, what actually is alive in you, what actually is alive in the situation. And if you bring in ideas, and the vows, one of the duties of the vows is it shows you what kind of ideas you might come in with. That you don't want things to be what they are, so you tend to fudge them or ignore them, or you want to get rid of things, or you want to somehow manipulate your experience so that it's better or worse. But as those things start to shed, if you can bear staying in the vessel, which is why it's nice to have the Dharma, the teachings, and the companions, that all that just starts to dissolve, and more of reality can reach you, and more of you is free to respond to it. That's a nice thing. And now he says one thing I thought I'd share with you from this article, and then maybe we'll sit. He's talking about taking refuge in the Dharma or the teachings. And he says basically what that means is that you're taking refuge in knowing that it's worthwhile to walk on the earth, that nothing is a waste of your time, nothing is punishment, and nothing is cause for resentment or complaint, that all of life is a fertile situation for learning, and that there'll always be pain and pleasure, good or bad, justice or injustice, but there'll always be our ideas of those things, but that it's all on the path, it's all the Dharma. I don't know, I guess it's a freedom that comes by, instead of that moment to moment, it's not just taking refuge once, it's like moment to moment choosing to stay here, choosing to be open, that everything is the Dharma. So I don't know. I have other things I could say, John, but what do you have anything else you want to say? And maybe we can sit.
One thing I think is that refuge is not a purchase in that, as you point out, shopping, but purchase in that it will, if you're good, it will spare you from X. Nothing spares you from your life, and you don't really, when you really look at it, you don't want anything to spare you from your life. And that if you realize how uncertain everything is, the vast, interstellar explosions covering thousands of light years and so on, and presumably any day we could be caught. Anytime in the next few million years, we could be caught in one of those. So uncertainty is this profoundly ever-present thing, including what I'll feel, how people I love will treat me, all that sort of thing. And so to trust the uncertainty and rest in it is, I think, a very profound thing. And the final thing is that when we were talking about this, we were talking about how interesting shame and scorn is, and I failed, and those kind of thoughts are in terms of refuge. And so you can tell when you look at that, you're not thinking, I won't ever do this. I won't ever lose my temper and yell at somebody, or I won't ever, whatever you do. Some people have affairs, I won't have affairs, or I won't steal things, or whatever. I won't lie about things. It's more like that whole thing starts to become into consciousness and becomes the material for the vessel that gets heated and cooked, and pressure happens, and wisdom comes out of that as we become conscious of it. And I find that it's certainly what we do changes. We're more kind and generous and modest, I suppose. But I don't know. It's not really about virtue. Is its own, provides its own shadow where we persecute people to prove our virtue and things like that. So that's all I want to add.
The first three vows, the Bodhisattva vows, John mentioned, I take refuge in awakening. I take refuge in the way, the path. I take refuge in my companions. You can just see, what is refuge for you? What kind of feelings does it conjure? I remember a dream when I had started the refuge process with PZI. I'd already kind of, I had done it with another community, but I had realized that I hadn't really included the Sangha part in some way. And I had this dream where there were all these gold rocks, and each rock was representing each person's dharma. And somehow in the dream, I was reflecting to myself on the three jewels: awakening, the path, companions. And I was realizing I was finally learning something about Sangha, something about the gold rock that was everyone. I take refuge in awakening. I take refuge in the way. I take refuge in my companions. Sometimes people tell me when they first start coming to the open temple, they don't know why, but every morning they'll just cry. Tears just flow down their cheeks. And as they start to feel into it, it's because there's a setting down. Whoever they think they're supposed to be, whatever they think they're supposed to be figuring out, whatever effort is holding them up just starts to fall away. And they're free to feel their own being and to just respond out of that being. That's a taste of refuge.
You know, it's so great just to sit. One of the nice things that everything I thought I might say falls out of my head. And that's refuge right there. I was thinking about when we advertised this thing Tess and I are doing, and a web designer is away, but she sent in a picture of an old rakusu, the back of an old rakusu, which is like silk, and it's got a name on it. It's got the Chinese characters, but it's all frayed and falling. You can tell she's worn it so much that it's just fallen apart. And this, and I noticed this one of mine is falling apart too. It's like I need, I need another one, but I kind of like it. And I don't, so I'm just waiting this thing that's sort of falling off me. And Tess has this beautiful, crisp new one. I'm looking at her thing. I think, wow, that's nice. Maybe I should get a new one. But and I was thinking about what a garment is. That when many years ago, I got cancer, and it turned out okay. But whatever that means. But it one of the things I noticed I got was I got a watch, which presumably I meant time, So that's the bell, that's time, in Zen, and then I got a jacket and a blanket, and so I went, and the jacket I thought, oh, so that's what the rakusu is, it's the robe of the Buddha, and it's the jacket, and it'll keep you warm, and it will, if there's a time of trouble, and I just love that, and so for us, these garments have become a kind of a way of, like, if you're a teacher and you're doing one, you just go into deeply meditate and go into it, and then you paint it, and the name is on the inside where no one can see it unless you choose to show it to them, and I think that's rather beautiful. I knew there's another a teacher I studied with for a short time, but I actually passed my first koans with, was a Korean teacher, and he would say, everybody wants to do refuge, right? And he'd do the vows in public, and then he'd line them up and say, you're no mind, you're no thinking, you're no enlightenment, you're no non-doing, and he'd just like line them up, and just the names would come out of his head like that, and that's what you were. And so, but we have a different thing where we try to talk to the deep psyche and have a name, and so Tess is a dragon is a lineage name, but she says she's a dragon, but she's a dawn dragon because she's the awakening of things. So that kind of. I wanted to say something, but I think that wearing the robe has actually become this artwork and this fun thing, and so.
Isn't it also true that one of the legends of the rakusu is when, Buddhism was no longer in favor at the time, and all the temples got emptied out, and people would wear their rakusu, as sort of as part of their practice, just against their body underneath their clothes. I know there are different versions of where they say they came from, but I always find that one very touching. That somehow, especially that just before I got this most recent rakusu, I had a dream that as John was working on it, it was creating itself. The characters and different things were creating itself. And so it's this, I don't know, it's this garment that somehow incorporates something deeply personal that's given to you. But then there's the front side, which was made by these people who live on Vashon Island. And for a teacher's rakusu, we give them these old antique obis, and I found out that the woman really loves doing these because she gets to somehow find all the images, and so it's this incredibly touching handmade sort of thing that they create. And then on the back, John painted on this one a dragon, and then the different calligraphies that go with my names. My refuge name is Mysterious Song, and then my teaching name is Dawn Dragon. And so there's something quite incredible about receiving a name too, in some of David Hinton's old ways of translating some of the old Chinese texts. He actually, instead of just having the words which sound pretty esoteric to us, he uses, stone head, or as John was saying, no enlightenment, or I don't know, mountain song, or some, you get how these people were taking on, poets would even take on lineage names within their tradition, that they would uphold the kind of, I don't know, the spirits that lived inside of them or something like that. That seems part of refuge too, as a kind of, I don't know, a kind of returning to the elements. It is a kind of, we don't really do the shaving of heads anymore, although at my transmission ceremony, John took a big chunk out of my hair, and I'm now getting this very good alfalfa sort of look going in the back when I wash my head. But there's something about not only giving something that you really are. I don't know. It part of refuge, I think, is realizing reality is actually on your side, but it's not the you that has all the plans and goals and opinions and ideas. It's the broader you that's part of everything. And somehow the naming and the garment, it's like you get taken back into the elements in some way, I think.
It's not, I can let go of all that, the person who wants all these things, and whatever happens is going to be interesting. So, if there's a mistake, that will be interesting. Yeah. And then there aren't any mistakes. So I take refuge. I take refuge in awakening. I take refuge in the way. I take refuge in my companions. Take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, in the Sangha. And there was always, if I just put out my foot, there's always a path. And I can't demand that there be a path. I just have to put out my foot to find the path, really. And so the path reveals itself that way. I'm not getting something I had planned.
I take refuge in awakening. I take refuge in the way. I take refuge in my companions. Or as the verse of the rakusus goes, this is the robe of freedom, the bare field, the blessings. I receive the Tathagata's teaching, which wakes all beings. I take refuge right here. Shall we see if our companion Noble Weasel has anything to say, John? I think we should. Jesse Carden.
Hi.
Hi, tell us
Good
something
morning.
about refuge.
And what's coming up for me is that I'm working on a couple of songs right now. I'm writing a couple of songs, and whenever I do that, there's a couple of periods that I go through that are not that dissimilar from when I remember my wife being pregnant with our son. For the first several months is like interesting and kind of cool, and there's changes, and then by seven or 8 or 9 months, it's like, get this thing out of me. I'm done with this experience. And so I'm at that point with these 2 songs where they're pretty much fully formed, but for life circumstances that just don't have the time and the energy to like finish them up. And when I get into that period, it's like I get so obsessed with that project that everything that is not that in my life then feels in opposition to me. I get completely identified with the process, and it's like wife, job, kids, brushing my teeth, Sunday morning meditation, anything that's not engaging in that. It's really painful sometimes. And what I'm noticing this morning is that it doesn't have to be that way or otherwise. It's just like the refuge is there, right? It's not that I need to figure out a way to stop being so obsessive about music, or that I have to get everybody else in my life out of the way so that I can do it. It is actually right there. And so during the meditation, I just got really interested in what is it like to be there in this kind of, it's like a hungry ghost bardo. It's just never enough. There's always the reaching and like what you couldn't see if you had been looking at me during the meditation is that I'm like picking my fingernails apart. My mind is like, you gotta try this chord and try this sound, or what about this? And I almost signed off a bunch of times because I thought I just can't bear this any longer. And wow, great to have a practice that like I don't have to get rid of any of that. And actually the awakening part is right there in the middle of it without adding or subtracting anything. So thanks for that.
I take refuge in obsession. I take refuge in the picking of my fingernails. Yeah, that's great. John Joseph, I think you're around here somewhere. You have anything you want to say about Refuge? Where's our John Joseph?
I
There you are.
yeah. You asked earlier, Tess, about what does refuge mean for you, and that just kind of opened up for me. And you had the metaphor, you had the story about the little baby bird. As it got bigger, the nest got smaller, and I just felt like I was climbing on the edge of that nest, and I was just launching off into really the greater nest, the nest of the nest of freedom, and the nest of really where the world is not in opposition. And John mentioned this, kind of where the world is really supporting me, and each of its many bits, are all supporting me, and that's the world of freedom. And I felt that following your story. That's a really lovely story. Thank you.
Thanks, John. John Tarrant, do you have anything else you want to say before we?
Yeah, there's some, for me, I think it's different for everyone, but for me, there was this thing of where I felt like I had to have something to help hold me in the deep, difficult work of the practice, to transform the psyche and the spirit. And so I thought, oh, I guess I need refuge, without having a clue really what it was about for me. And then gradually it took hold of me. I mean, the practice took hold of me. And so then, when I first put on the robe, I was really connected to the ancient teachers and things like that. And not that I'm not now, but I'm inside that now. Gradually we become inside it all, and we're always, there's nothing that's not meditation, really, and there's nothing that's not healing, and there's nothing that's not the virtue of the way. So I guess that's all I want to say.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think the last thing I'll say about that is just, I don't know, honoring that desire within us to transform. Like, even if it's misguided at first and it has no idea what it's doing, or it thinks it means becoming a completely different person, or whatever it is, that I think refuge does somehow compel. I think about that in my story too, that the desire to transform was deeply sincere. And then the willingness to step onto the path. And I guess, like you say, you just keep hope, you keep realizing the next step appears if you're willing to not have the trapdoor open behind you, or that you're willing to commit sincerely. So thanks very much to Jordan and Michael. I feel like you were kind of the flying out into the vastness for us. I just kept being carried